The sun hung low over the Grand Line, casting long shadows across the deck of the Thousand Sunny as the Straw Hat Pirates sailed through calm waters. Luffy sat atop the figurehead, his straw hat tilted back as he grinned at the horizon. "Meat," he shouted suddenly, snapping his crew out of their routines. Sanji sighed, flipping a piece of seared steak in his pan. "You just ate, you damn rubber idiot," he muttered, though there was no real bite to his words. Nami rolled her eyes, adjusting the straps of her orange bikini before returning to her navigation charts. "If we keep feeding him at this rate, we'll run out of supplies before we reach the next island," she complained, though the fondness in her voice betrayed her. The world of One Piece was vast and unpredictable, a place where pirates, marines, and ancient legends clashed in a never-ending struggle for power. The Straw Hats had faced countless enemies, from warlords to emperors, but the sea always had new horrors to unveil. This journey was no different. A thick mist began to roll in, obscuring the horizon and sending a chill through the air. Zoro's hand instinctively went to the hilt of Wado Ichimonji, his sharp eyes scanning the fog. "Something's off," he murmured. Robin, ever observant, leaned against the railing, her dark eyes narrowing. "The sea is too quiet," she noted. "No wind, no waves, unnatural for these waters." Before anyone could respond, the ocean beneath them erupted in a violent surge, sending the Thousand Sunny lurching to the side. Usopp yelped, clinging to the mast for dear life as Frankie struggled to steady the ship's wheel. What the hell was that? Brook's skeletal fingers tightened around his cane sword, his usual jovial tone gone. Then, from the depths, an enormous shadow rose, a monstrous serpent, its scales glistening like polished obsidian, its eyes burning with an intelligence that sent shivers down even Luffy's spine. "Sea Emperor." Jinbei breathed, his fists clenching. "I've only heard legends of these creatures. They're said to be remnants of the ancient kingdom, guardians of lost power." Luffy's grin didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened with determination. "Doesn't matter what it is, if it's in our way, we'll knock it out." He launched himself forward, his arms stretching back before snapping forward in a devastating gum-gum pistol. The blow connected with the beast's snout, but to everyone's shock, the creature barely flinched. Its tail whipped around, faster than any of them could react, and Luffy barely managed to twist midair before the impact sent him crashing into the mast, splintering wood. Zoro was already moving, his three swords gleaming as he unleashed a furious onigiri. The blade screeched against the creature's scales, sparks flying, but only shallow cuts formed. "TCH, tough bastard," he growled. Sanji's leg ignited in flames as he spun through the air, delivering a diable jambe straight to the beast's side. The heat seared the scales, but still, the monster barely recoiled. Its massive maw opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and a torrent of pressurized water blasted forth, forcing the crew to scatter. Nami cursed, summoning a thundercloud with her Klimattact. "Zeus, give it everything." The homie roared to life, hurling a crackling bolt of lightning at the serpent. The electricity danced across its body, but the beast only hissed in annoyance before lunging. Its fangs closed around Luffy's outstretched arm, and with a sickening crunch, tore it clean off. Blood sprayed across the deck as Luffy stumbled back, his face twisted in pain but his spirit unbroken. The crew froze in horror. Luffy!" Chopper screamed, already rushing forward with medical supplies. But the rubber man just gritted his teeth, his remaining fist clenching. "I'm fine," he ground out, though his voice was strained. "This thing. It's not just some random monster. It's hunting us." The serpent coiled back, its eyes locked onto Luffy with an eerie focus, as if it recognized him. And then, from the mist behind it, more shapes emerged, dozens of them. Smaller, but no less deadly. The crew braced themselves, realization dawning. This wasn't just an attack. It was the beginning of something far worse. As the first wave of creatures surged forward, the Straw Hats stood together, their resolve unshaken. The battle had only just begun, and the sea had never felt more merciless. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blood as Luffy staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. The Sea Emperor loomed over him, its massive form blotting out the sun, its jagged fins cutting through the waves like blades. The crew of the Thousand Sunny was scattered across the battlefield, each member locked in their own desperate struggle against the monstrous sea creatures swarming the deck. Nami's Klimattact crackled with electricity as she tried to fend off a swarm of razor-toothed fish, while Zoro's swords clashed against the armored hide of a colossal crab, sparks flying with each strike. Luffy clenched his remaining fist, the stump of his left arm still throbbing where the Sea Emperor's jaws had torn it away. The pain was sharp, but the fear in his crew's eyes hurt worse. He couldn't afford to falter now. "Gear forth," he roared, his body expanding with raw power as he launched himself at the beast. The Sea Emperor roared in response, its tail whipping through the air like a wrecking ball. Luffy barely dodged, the force of the impact sending shockwaves through the water. He countered with a devastating jet culverin, his fist slamming into the creature's snout with enough force to crack bone. The beast reeled, but it wasn't enough. Across the deck, Sanji kicked a towering eel away from Robin, his brow furrowed. "We can't keep this up," he shouted over the chaos. "These things just keep coming." Robin nodded, her arms multiplying in a flurry as she grappled with another creature, but the strain was evident in her face. Then, a new sound cut through the din, a deep, rhythmic pulse, like a drumbeat from the depths. The water around the ship began to churn violently, and from the abyss rose a second monstrous shape, its glowing eyes locking onto the Sunny. "Another one?" Usopp shrieked, his knees buckling. Jinbei's fists clenched as he recognized the threat. "That's not just another beast," he growled. "That's the Sea Emperor's mate. They hunt in pairs." Luffy's stomach dropped. They were already struggling against one, how could they possibly take on two? His mind raced, searching for a strategy, but before he could act, a shadow fell over him. He barely had time to react before a massive claw slammed into his chest, sending him crashing through the mast. Wood splintered around him as he gasped for air, his vision swimming. Zoro cursed, slicing through another crab before turning to face the new threat. "We need to regroup," he barked. "Frankie, any ideas?" Frankie was already at the helm, his mechanical fingers flying over the controls. "I can give us a speed boost, but we'll need to clear a path first." Nami's eyes darted between the two beasts, her mind working furiously. "The currents are shifting," she muttered. "If we can lure them into a whirlpool, we might be able to trap them long enough to escape." But time was running out. The second Sea Emperor lunged, its maw gaping wide, and Luffy knew they were out of options. He forced himself up, his body screaming in protest. "Everyone, get ready," he shouted. "We're ending this now." As the crew braced for the final clash, something unexpected happened. A distant explosion rocked the horizon, and a fleet of ships emerged from the mist. The flag flying high sent a chill down Luffy's spine. It was Blackbeard's mark. Betrayal or salvation? There was no time to wonder. The battle had just gotten a lot more complicated. The sea roared beneath the Thousand Sunny as the crew scrambled to regroup after their brutal encounter with the Sea Emperor, its monstrous silhouette still lurking beneath the waves. Blood dripped from Luffy's torn sleeve where his arm had been, his teeth gritted in a pained grin. "We're not done yet," he growled, but before he could charge again, a deafening crack split the air, a cannonball tore through the mast, sending splinters raining down. From the fog emerged a sleek black schooner, its sails emblazoned with a jagged crimson cross. At its helm stood a towering figure wrapped in a tattered navy coat, his face obscured by a steel mask shaped like a snarling wolf. Well, the masked man drawled, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Didn't expect to find the infamous Straw Hats already half dead. Saves me the trouble." Zoro's swords flashed free. "Who the hell are you?" "Captain Varosdane," the man replied, stepping onto the railing with eerie balance. "And that wreck of a ship you're on? Consider it mine now." Before anyone could react, Varos lunged, his movement a blur. A gauntleted fist slammed into Sanji's ribs, sending the cook crashing into the mast. "Sanji," Nami cried, but Varos was already spinning, his boot connecting with Zoro's guard hard enough to skid him backward. Luffy snarled, his remaining fist coiling back. Gear second. His body steamed as he shot forward, a jet-powered punch aimed straight for Varos's mask. But the captain twisted mid-air, his arm morphing, steel plates shifted, revealing a hidden barrel in his forearm. A point-blank blast of sea stone shrapnel erupted, forcing Luffy to abort his attack and roll aside. "Sea stone?" Robin gasped. Varos chuckled, flexing his mechanized arm. "Courtesy of some old friends in the world government." His gaze locked onto Luffy's missing limb. "Heard you tangled with the Emperor. Pity. I wanted to be the one to break you." Usopp's slingshot twanged, a fire star streaking toward Varos's face. The captain didn't even flinch, his mask split open, revealing a mouthful of serrated teeth, and he bit the projectile midair, flames sputtering harmlessly against his metal jaws. "Cute," he muttered before spitting the remnants at Usopp's feet. Chopper, in heavy point, roared and charged, but Varos sidestepped, driving a knee into the reindeer's gut before flipping him over his shoulder. "Weak," he taunted. "No wonder the Marines let you run wild, you're barely a challenge." Zoro wiped blood from his lip, his grip tightening on Enma. Talk too much for a guy who hasn't won yet. He lunged, blades a whirlwind of slashes. Varos parried with his augmented arm, sparks flying as metal shrieked against metal. But then, his other sleeve tore open, revealing a second hidden weapon, a chain-linked whip coiled around his wrist. It lashed out, wrapping around Zoro's ankle, and yanked him off balance. Sanji, back on his feet, dove in with a flaming kick. Diable jambe. Varos barely raised his arm in time, the impact scorching his coat, but he retaliated by slamming his forehead into Sanji's nose with a sickening crunch. Amid the chaos, a new voice cut through, a woman's, sharp and commanding. Enough. A figure dropped from the crow's nest of Varos's ship, landing between the combatants with effortless grace. She wore a long duster over a corset of woven kelp, her hair a wild tangle of sea-green curls. A trident rested on her back, its prongs glistening with venom. Varos stiffened. "Kailani," he spat. "This isn't your fight." She smirked. "It is now." Her eyes flicked to Luffy. "I owe your brother a debt, Straw Hat. Let's call this repayment." Luffy blinked. "Ace?" Before he could press further, Kailani spun, her trident whipping out to block a slash from Varos's chain. "Run while you can," she hissed at the crew. "This bastard's got a fleet en route, and you're in no shape to fight it." Varos snarled, his mask hissing as steam vented from its seams. "Traitor!" He lunged, but Kailani was faster, her trident flicked, a dart of poison nicking his shoulder. He staggered, muscles locking momentarily. Nami didn't hesitate. "Everyone, to the helm. Now!" The crew scrambled as she grabbed the wheel, steering the Sunny into a sharp turn. Behind them, Kailani and Varos clashed, her fluid dodges a stark contrast to his brute force. As the distance grew, Luffy watched, fists clenched. A new enemy. A new ally. And somewhere beneath them, the Sea Emperor still waited. The game had just gotten a lot more complicated. The sea roared beneath the Thousand Sunny as Luffy stood on the deck, his straw hat pulled low over his eyes, the wind whipping at his tattered vest. The air was thick with the stench of salt and blood, a grim reminder of the battle already waged. Before them, the Sea Emperor, a monstrous leviathan with scales like blackened steel and eyes that glowed like dying stars, rose from the depths, its maw dripping with seawater and malice. Luffy clenched his fists, his muscles screaming from exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. "Zoro, Sanji, cover me!" he barked, his voice raw. The crew moved as one, Zoro's blades flashed, slicing through the tendrils of water the beast hurled at them, while Sanji kicked off the railing, flames erupting from his heel as he struck the creature's side. But the Sea Emperor barely flinched, its hide absorbing the blows like stone. Then, without warning, it struck. A massive, whip-like tail lashed out, faster than any of them could react. Luffy barely had time to stretch his arms to push his friends clear before the impact sent him flying. Pain exploded in his left side, and when he hit the mast, he felt something give way, a sickening crack. His vision blurred as he looked down, his stomach lurching at the sight of his arm, mangled and limp, hanging by threads of muscle and sinew. Nami screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Luffy!" He gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. The pain was unbearable, but he couldn't stop, not now. The Sea Emperor loomed, its massive body blocking out the sun, its laughter a deep, guttural rumble that shook the ship. "You are nothing, little king," it taunted, its voice like the crushing depths. "Your dream ends here." Luffy's breath came in ragged gasps, but his eyes burned with defiance. He wasn't done yet. Then, betrayal. From the shadows of the crow's nest, a figure moved. A flash of steel, a cold voice. "Forgive me, Captain." The words were a whisper, but they struck harder than any blade. Luffy turned just in time to see the glint of a knife, his own Nakama's hand driving it toward his back. He twisted, but not fast enough. The blade sank deep into his side, and the shock of it sent him to his knees. His vision swam as he looked up into the face of the traitor. "Why?" he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. The answer came with a sneer. "The world government promised me everything. Freedom. Power. A life without running." The crew stood frozen in horror as the truth settled over them. One of their own had sold them out. The Sea Emperor laughed, its massive form surging forward, sensing victory. The crew scrambled, but their formation was broken, their trust shattered. Zoro roared, charging the traitor, but the Sea Emperor's tail slammed down between them, separating the crew further. Luffy clutched his bleeding side, his mind racing. They were outmatched, outmaneuvered. But giving up wasn't an option. With a growl, he forced himself to stand, his remaining arm trembling. If he couldn't fight as he always had, then he'd fight smarter. Sanji, he shouted. The rigging, use it. Understanding flashed in the cook's eyes. With a swift kick, he severed the ropes holding the sails, the heavy canvas unfurling like a net. The Sea Emperor, too massive to dodge, snarled as the fabric tangled around its limbs. Now, Usopp, Luffy yelled. The sniper didn't hesitate. His slingshot snapped, a sea stone-tipped pellet striking true, right into the beast's open mouth. The Sea Emperor convulsed, its body locking as the sea stone sapped its strength. It wasn't enough to kill it, but it bought them time. Luffy turned to the traitor, his heart heavy but his resolve unbroken. You were my nakama, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But you chose wrong. The fight wasn't over. The Sea Emperor would recover. The crew was wounded, their ship battered. But as long as they stood together, they still had a chance. And Luffy would make sure they took it, no matter the cost. The sea roared beneath the thousand sunny as the colossal shadow of the Sea Emperor loomed over the ship, its massive tentacles thrashing the waves into a frothing frenzy. Luffy gritted his teeth, his remaining arm clenched into a fist, his body still aching from their last encounter. The beast had taken more than just his arm, it had shattered their confidence, leaving them scrambling for a plan. But they couldn't afford hesitation now. Not when the monster's next strike could send them all to the depths. Zoro's blades gleamed under the storm-lit sky as he leapt onto the railing, his stance unshaken despite the ship's violent rocking. We can't keep dodging forever, he growled. This thing's got a pattern, it telegraphs its attacks right before it strikes. Nami, clutching her clean attack with white-knuckled determination, nodded sharply. I've been tracking its movements. There's a 3-second delay between its tentacles retracting and lashing out again. If we time it right. Before she could finish, the Sea Emperor's massive limb crashed down, splitting the deck with a deafening crack. Sanji barely yanked Usopp out of the way in time, the sniper's eyes wide with terror. We need to hit it where it's soft, Usopp shouted, fumbling for a specialized pop green. Its underbelly, it's covered in scars. Something wounded it before. Luffy's eyes burned with renewed focus. If there was a weakness, they had to exploit it, fast. Everyone, distract it. He barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Without hesitation, Zoro and Sanji launched into action, their movements a blur as they slashed and kicked at the beast's limbs, drawing its attention. Robin's hands bloomed across its hide, gripping and twisting to slow its movements, while Frankie's radical beam scorched a path across its armored back. Nami seized the opening, summoning a thundercloud with a swift swing of her weapon. Now, she cried. The lightning struck true, arcing across the Sea Emperor's body, forcing it to recoil, just long enough for Luffy to rocket forward, his remaining fist coated in swirling haki. He aimed for the scarred underbelly, his muscles screaming as he pushed his devil fruit to its limit. Gamu Gamu no. The monster twisted at the last second, and Luffy's punch grazed its side instead of striking true. The backlash sent him spiraling backward, blood spraying from his mouth as he crashed into the mast. The beast's enraged shriek shook the air, its tentacles whipping toward the defenseless crew. But then, a new presence cut through the storm. A ship, sleek and swift, barreled toward them, its cannons roaring. The barrage struck the Sea Emperor's eyes, forcing it to recoil. On the deck stood a familiar figure, Law, his smirk sharp as ever. Took you long enough to call for backup, he drawled, his fingers already glowing with the power of his Op no Mi. The tide of battle shifted. With Law's tactical genius and the combined might of both crews, they fought with brutal precision. Luffy, though battered, refused to stay down. He pushed himself up, locking eyes with his allies. One more shot, he panted. We hit it together. And as the Sea Emperor reared for its final assault, the Straw Hats and the Heart Pirates struck as one, a storm of blades, bullets, and raw power, aiming straight for the heart of the beast. The ocean itself seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. The ocean roared beneath them, waves crashing like thunder as the Straw Hat Pirates faced off against the monstrous Sea Emperor, a leviathan of the deep whose sheer size blotted out the sun. Luffy's sandals dug into the deck of the Thousand Sunny, his muscles coiled like springs, his breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. Around him, his crew fought desperately, each pushed to their absolute limits. Zoro's blades flashed, deflecting a barrage of razor-sharp water projectiles, while Sanji's flaming kicks carved arcs through the mist, forcing back the beast's serpentine tendrils. Nami's lightning crackled in the storm-choked sky, and Frankie's radical beam seared through the monster's thick hide, but the creature only seemed to grow more enraged. Luffy gritted his teeth, his haki flaring as he launched himself forward, his fist rocketing toward the Sea Emperor's colossal maw. Gamu Gamu no. King Kong gun. The impact sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield, the sheer force of the blow cracking the beast's armored scales. But before Luffy could retreat, a monstrous tail whipped around, faster than sight, and, crack. His arm was torn clean off in a spray of crimson. The pain was blinding, but Luffy didn't scream. His eyes burned with defiance as he landed hard on the deck, blood pooling beneath him. The crew froze for a split second, horror flashing across their faces, but the Sea Emperor wasn't done. Its massive jaws opened, a swirling vortex of water forming in its throat, a devastating tidal blast primed to obliterate the Sunny. Usopp's hands trembled as he fired a desperate explosive shot, but the creature barely flinched. Robin's arms sprouted from its body, trying to pry its mouth shut, but the sheer force ripped her constructs apart. Then, boom! A colossal shockwave erupted as Jinbei surged forward, his fishman karate meeting the torrent in a clash of raw power. Luffy, he roared, veins bulging as he held back the attack with every ounce of strength. You've got one shot left. Luffy staggered to his feet, his remaining fist clenched so tight his nails drew blood. His body pulsed with Conqueror's haki, the air itself trembling. He didn't need words. His crew understood. Zoro and Sanji flanked him, covering his advance as he dashed forward, his sandals barely touching the water. The Sea Emperor's eyes locked onto him, sensing the imminent threat, but it was too late. With a roar that shook the heavens, Luffy unleashed his final attack. Gear 5th. His body expanded, his rubbery form stretching beyond human limits, his fist glowing with the combined might of armament and Conqueror's haki. Gamu Gamu no. Barang gun. The punch connected with the force of a meteor strike, the shockwave ripping through the Sea Emperor's body, shattering its monstrous form into a rain of seawater and shattered scales. Silence. Then, cheers erupted as the beast collapsed, the ocean finally stilling. But victory came at a cost. Luffy swayed, his vision blurring as he collapsed into Jinbei's arms. The crew rushed to his side, their faces a mix of relief and dread. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. And Luffy, now missing an arm, would have to rise again, stronger than ever. The next storm was coming. And they would face it together. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blood as Luffy stood on the deck of the Thousand Sunny, his chest heaving, his vision blurred by sweat and exhaustion. The Sea Emperor loomed before him, a monstrous leviathan of the deep, its scales gleaming like obsidian under the storm-racked sky. The crew was scattered, Zoro barely conscious against the mast, Sanji's leg trembling from overuse, Nami clutching her broken arm, but they weren't beaten yet. Luffy clenched his remaining fist, the stump of his left arm still raw and throbbing where the beast had torn it free. The pain was white-hot, but he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. He had promised his crew they'd make it through this, and he wasn't about to break that promise now. One more shot, he muttered, his voice hoarse. The Sea Emperor roared, a sound that shook the ocean itself, and lunged. Luffy barely dodged, rolling across the deck as the creature's jaws snapped shut where he'd been standing. His muscles screamed in protest, but he forced himself up, his haki flaring in defiance. He could feel it, the last reserves of his strength, the will to push beyond his limits. Gear 5th, he shouted, his body expanding, his skin glowing red as his veins pulsed with raw power. The transformation was agony, every cell in his body burning, but he embraced it. This was his final gamble. The Sea Emperor struck again, its massive tail whipping toward him. Luffy didn't dodge. Instead, he met it head-on, his fist colliding with the beast's scales in an explosion of force that sent shockwaves rippling across the water. The impact shattered the deck beneath him, splinters flying, but he held firm. Not done yet. He growled, pushing forward, his fist driving deeper. The Sea Emperor shrieked, its body convulsing as cracks spiderwebbed across its armored hide. Luffy could feel the moment his haki pierced through, the exact second the beast's defenses broke. With a final, earth-shattering roar, the Sea Emperor collapsed, its massive form crashing into the sea with a tidal wave that nearly capsized the Sunny. The storm above began to break, the clouds parting as sunlight streamed down. Silence followed. Luffy's body gave out, his Gear 5th receding as he crumpled to the deck. He was dimly aware of his crew rushing toward him, their voices a chorus of relief and concern. He tried to smile, but his vision was fading. When he woke, it was to the soft rocking of the ship and the scent of antiseptic. Chopper stood over him, his tiny hooves pressing a fresh bandage to his stump. "You idiot," the little doctor sniffled. "You could have died." Luffy chuckled weakly. "But I didn't." The aftermath was profound. News of the Sea Emperor's defeat spread across the Grand Line like wildfire, reshaping the balance of power. The world government took notice, the emperors whispered in uneasy tones, and the Straw Hat's legend grew. But for Luffy, the cost was personal. He flexed his remaining hand, feeling the phantom weight of what he'd lost. Zoro leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You gonna be alright, Captain?" Luffy grinned. "Yeah. We've got bigger things to do." And with that, the Sunny sailed on, toward the next horizon. The sea roared beneath the Thousand Sunny, its waves churning like the turmoil in Luffy's chest. The air still crackled with the remnants of their last battle, the clash with the Sea Emperor, a monstrous leviathan that had emerged from the depths, its scales gleaming like polished obsidian. The crew had won, but the cost was etched in the empty space where Luffy's right arm had been. The stump throbbed, bandages soaked through with blood, but the pain was nothing compared to the weight of what they'd unleashed. Nami's voice cut through the silence, sharp with urgency. "We need to move. Now." Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the log pose, its needle spinning wildly, as if the very seas were rejecting their presence. "The ocean's currents are shifting, something's coming." Zoro's swords were already drawn, his stance tense. "You felt it too, huh?" His gaze flicked to the horizon, where the water had begun to darken, shadows pooling beneath the surface. Sanji exhaled a stream of smoke, his usual bravado dulled by exhaustion. "Just when I thought we'd caught a break." Then the sea erupted. Not the Sea Emperor, this was something else. A figure clad in jagged coral armor burst from the waves, riding atop a whirlpool of frothing water. The crew barely had time to register the newcomer before a geyser of pressurized water slammed into the deck, sending Usopp tumbling backward. "Straw Hats!" The figure bellowed, voice echoing like a tidal wave. "You've disturbed the balance of the deep. Now, you pay." Luffy gritted his teeth, his remaining fist clenching. "Who the hell are you?" "The Warden of the Abyss," the figure hissed, raising a trident wreathed in swirling currents. "And your reckoning." The fight began in a blur. The Warden moved like the sea itself, fluid, relentless. Zoro lunged first, his blades meeting the trident in a spray of sparks, but the force of the impact sent him skidding back. Sanji spun, delivering a flaming kick, only for the Warden to dissolve into water, reforming behind him with a crushing blow to his ribs. Luffy tried to stretch his arm, force of habit, but the absence of his limb left him unbalanced. He barely dodged a spear of water that sliced through the mast behind him. "Luffy!" Chopper shouted, transforming into his heavy point, but the Warden flicked a hand, and a wall of water slammed into him, pinning him against the railing. Nami cursed, summoning a gust of wind with her Klima tact, but the Warden merely laughed. "You think to command the storms against me? I am the storm." He raised his trident, and the sky split open, rain falling in sharp, needle-like droplets. Usopp, scrambling to his feet, fired a pop green, a massive carnivorous plant, but the Warden sliced through it effortlessly. Pathetic. Desperation clawed at Luffy's throat. They were exhausted, wounded, and now this? He couldn't let his crew fall here. Then his eyes locked onto the Warden's armor, coral, porous, brittle if dried out. "Nami," he yelled. "Heat." Understanding flashed in her eyes. She twisted the dials on her Klima tact, summoning a blistering gust of hot air. At the same moment, Sanji vaulted into the air, his leg igniting. Hell memories. The combined heat seared the Warden's armor, cracked spider webbing across its surface. The Warden snarled, but before he could react, Zoro was there, his swords a blur. Santoryu Ogi, Ichidai Sanzen Daisen Seikai. The triple slash shattered the coral, sending the Warden stumbling back. Luffy didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, his remaining fist drawn back. Gamu Gamu no. The Warden's eyes widened as he realized, too late, what was coming. Pistol. The punch connected, sending the Warden hurtling into the sea. The waters calmed, the storm dissipating as quickly as it had come. Silence. Then, a groan from Frankie, who'd been knocked into the rigging. Well. That sucked. But the victory felt hollow. The Warden's words lingered like a curse. Disturbed the balance. Luffy stared at his missing arm, then at his crew, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Nami's voice was quiet. "This isn't over, is it?" Luffy shook his head. "No." Because the sea was vast, and now, it was angry. The air was thick with the stench of salt and blood as the Thousand Sunny groaned under the weight of the Sea Emperor's monstrous bulk. Luffy's breath came in ragged gasps, his body screaming from the relentless battle. The creature, a leviathan of scales and sinew, its eyes burning with primal fury, loomed over the ship, its tail thrashing the ocean into a frothing maelstrom. Around him, the crew staggered, their faces etched with exhaustion. Zoro's swords were chipped, Sanji's leg trembled from overuse, and Nami's hands shook as she clutched her clima-tact. They were spent. But the Sea Emperor wasn't. "We can't keep this up," Usopp wheezed, ducking as a whip-like tendril smashed the mast behind him into splinters. Luffy clenched his fists, his mind racing. They'd faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The Sea Emperor wasn't just strong, it was cunning. It had learned their moves, adapted. And now, it had taken something from him. His left arm, severed at the elbow, lay somewhere in the churning water. The pain was a distant throb beneath the adrenaline, but the shock of it lingered. He couldn't stretch that arm anymore. Couldn't fight the way he always had. "We need a plan," Robin said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Something it won't expect." Sanji spat blood onto the deck. "Easier said than done. This thing's faster than it looks." Zoro scowled. "Then we hit it harder." "No," Luffy growled, surprising even himself. "We hit it smarter." The crew turned to him, their eyes widening at the grim determination in his voice. He'd never been the strategist, that was usually Nami or Robin, but desperation had a way of sharpening the mind. It's too big to take down with brute force. But it's got weak spots. Eyes. Gills. We just gotta get to 'em. Nami's fingers flew over her clima-tact, calculations flashing in her eyes. "If we can blind it, even for a second, we might have a shot. But we'd need a distraction." "I'll handle that," Luffy said, flexing his remaining arm. "But I can't do it alone." The Sea Emperor roared, its maw gaping wide, and the crew scattered as a torrent of pressurized water erupted from its throat. The deck buckled, wood splintering beneath the force. Frankie barely had time to brace himself before a chunk of railing slammed into his chest, sending him skidding across the deck. "Frankie," Chopper cried, scrambling toward him. "I'm, cough super fine," Frankie groaned, though the crack in his metal plating suggested otherwise. Time was running out. The ship wouldn't hold much longer. Luffy met his crew's eyes one by one. "We do this together. Or we don't do it at all." Zoro smirked. "Took you long enough to say it." The plan was simple. And insane. Luffy would go straight for the Sea Emperor's face, drawing its attention while Zoro and Sanji flanked from opposite sides, aiming for the gills. Nami would use her clima-tact to blind it with a sudden burst of lightning, and Robin would immobilize its fins with her devil fruit powers, just long enough for Usopp and Frankie to fire a makeshift harpoon into its underbelly, where the scales were thinnest. Chopper would keep them alive, patching up wounds on the fly. It was a gamble. One misstep, and they were all dead. Luffy didn't hesitate. He launched himself off the deck, his remaining fist rocketing toward the Sea Emperor's eye. The creature snarled, swiping at him with a claw the size of a cannonball. Luffy twisted midair, barely avoiding the blow, and slammed his fist into its eyelid. The impact sent shockwaves up his arm, but the beast recoiled, howling in pain. Now. Zoro and Sanji moved like shadows, their blades and kicks flashing in the dim light. Zoro's swords carved into the gill slits, blackening the water with blood, while Sanji's flaming heel struck the same spot, searing the wound shut. The Sea Emperor thrashed, its tail whipping toward the ship. "Thunderbolt tempo!" Nami screamed. A bolt of lightning split the sky, striking the creature square in its other eye. It reared back, blinded, and Robin's arms sprouted from its fins, locking them in place. "Now!" Frankie bellowed, hefting the harpoon, a jagged piece of the broken mast, wrapped in chain and tipped with one of Zoro's discarded blades. Usopp took aim, his slingshot trembling but true. The harpoon whistled through the air, burying itself deep in the Sea Emperor's belly. The beast shuddered, its roar gurgling into a wet, choking gasp. But it wasn't dead. With a final, desperate surge, it lunged, straight for Luffy. There was no time to dodge. No time to think. And then... a blur of green and black. Zoro slammed into Luffy, shoving him aside as the Sea Emperor's fangs closed around the swordsman's torso. Blood sprayed. "Zoro!" Luffy screamed. Sanji was already moving, his foot connecting with the beast's jaw in a kick so fierce it cracked bone. The Sea Emperor reeled, its grip loosening just enough for Zoro to wrench himself free, but not without cost. His side was a mess of torn flesh, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. Chopper was there in an instant, hands glowing with medical energy, but his voice was tight with fear. He's losing too much blood." The Sea Emperor wasn't done. It staggered, but its remaining eye burned with hate. It would kill them. All of them. Luffy's vision went red. He didn't have 2 arms anymore. But he had his crew. And that was enough. One more hit, he rasped. All of us. Together. They knew what he meant. Sanji braced himself beside Zoro, who forced himself upright, swords trembling but raised. Nami's clean attack sparked, Robin's arms reappeared, and Frankie's remaining cannon whirred to life. Usopp's hand steadied. Chopper, still healing Zoro, nodded. Luffy took a breath. And they attacked. The Sea Emperor never stood a chance. When the dust settled, the beast lay motionless, its massive body sinking beneath the waves. The crew collapsed where they stood, too exhausted to cheer. But they were alive. And they still had one last fight ahead. The sea roared beneath the thousand sunny as the monstrous form of the Sea Emperor emerged from the depths, its colossal tentacles thrashing against the waves like living mountains. Luffy stood at the bow, his straw hat casting a shadow over his eyes, but the tension in his fists betrayed his resolve. The crew behind him, Zoro, Sanji, Nami, Usopp, Chopper, Robin, Frankie, Brook, and Jinbei, readied themselves, their breath steady despite the overwhelming presence before them. This was it, the final battle. The Sea Emperor's massive maw gaped open, revealing rows of jagged teeth as it let out a deafening roar that shook the very air. Without hesitation, Luffy launched himself forward, his body stretching as he rocketed toward the beast. Gear forth, Snakeman, he shouted, his form twisting with newfound speed. His fists blurred, striking the creature's face in a rapid barrage, each impact sending shockwaves through the water. The beast reeled, but one of its tentacles lashed out faster than Luffy could dodge. The rubbery limb wrapped around his torso, squeezing with crushing force. Bones creaked, and Luffy gritted his teeth as he struggled to break free. Zoro and Sanji moved in unison. Three-sword style, Dragon Twister, Zoro bellowed, his blade spinning in a whirlwind of slashes that severed the tentacle holding Luffy. Sanji followed with a fiery kick, Diable Jambe, flambéed shot. His heel slammed into the beast's eye, igniting the flesh with searing heat. The Sea Emperor howled in agony, its remaining tentacles flailing wildly. Usopp and Nami scrambled to the ship's defenses. Lightning tempo, Nami shouted, summoning a storm cloud that unleashed a torrent of electricity onto the beast's back. Usopp fired a barrage of explosive pop greens, the detonations lighting up the battlefield. But the creature was relentless. One of its massive limbs crashed down toward the Sunny, only for Frankie to intercept with a reinforced punch from the General Frankie. Not on my watch, he roared, straining against the force. Robin's hands bloomed across the beast's body, attempting to immobilize it, but the sheer thickness of its hide resisted her grip. Chopper, in Monster Point, barreled into the fray, his massive fists pounding into the creature's side. We can't let up. He growled. Brook's soul-chilling melody sliced through the chaos, slowing the beast's movements as his blade flickered in the air. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Let's see how you like this, cold soul slash. Jinbei, standing firm at the helm, summoned a tidal wave with his fishman karate, directing it like a hammer against the Sea Emperor's skull. The beast staggered, its movements growing sluggish. Luffy, now free, landed back on the Sunny, panting but determined. One more shot, he muttered, his arm trembling. He knew what he had to do. Gritting his teeth, Luffy stretched his arm back farther than ever before, his muscles screaming as he channeled every ounce of haki into his fist. The air itself seemed to warp around him. Gamu Gamu no. King Kong gun. With a primal roar, he unleashed the attack, his fist colliding with the Sea Emperor's skull in an explosion of force. The impact sent shockwaves rippling across the ocean, the creature's head snapping back with a sickening crack. But victory came at a cost. As the beast collapsed, one last thrashing tentacle whipped toward Luffy. He tried to dodge, but he was spent, too slow. The limb struck with brutal force, tearing through his right arm at the shoulder. Blood sprayed across the deck as Luffy stumbled back, his face pale with shock. The crew cried out in horror, but there was no time to react. The Sea Emperor's body began to sink, dragging the Sunny toward the whirlpool left in its wake. Zoro and Sanji acted instantly, severing the remaining tentacles with precise strikes while Frankie activated the ship's emergency thrusters. The Sunny lurched away from the abyss, the crew clinging to the rails as the sea calmed at last. Silence fell, broken only by Luffy's ragged breathing as he collapsed to his knees. Chopper was at his side in an instant, his hoofs trembling as he worked to stem the bleeding. Luffy. Hang on. He pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Luffy grinned weakly, his vision blurring. Hey. We won, right? The crew gathered around him, their expressions a mix of relief and anguish. Nami wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. Yeah. We won, you idiot. Days later, under a sky painted with the colors of dawn, the Straw Hat sailed toward a new horizon. Luffy sat on the figurehead, his missing arm now wrapped tightly in bandages, but his spirit unbroken. The crew had faced the impossible and emerged changed, scarred, but stronger. The world ahead was vast, and their journey far from over. As the wind filled the sails, Luffy laughed, loud and bright, his voice carrying across the waves. Next stop, the end of the Grand Line. And with that, the Thousand Sunny surged forward, carrying its crew toward whatever awaited them in the boundless sea of adventure. Word count, 2000.